We call triple helix partnerships. I think a lot of mentioned recently that quad helix partnership that's really involved the local government. But how does this partnership with industry really accelerate development, adoption, scaling up of diagnostics? And in this particular case, going to care, but we can explore it a bit with what I'm just going to care. We have an incredible panel. I'm very honored that you was making today. So, can I please ask each of you please to introduce yourself first? So, I'll start with Matt.
Hi, everybody. So, I'm Matt Bonin. I'm part of the digital health entity that's owned by AstraZeneca. So, we now support clinical trial technologies for companies around the world and work with about 15 of the top 20 pharma in decentralized trials and point of care testing within their clinical development programs.
Hi, I'm Simon Patton. I'm Chief Executive of the Amgen CIC. Sarah, I'm in Medical Jets as well. So there's two of us in the room. We're an organisation that tests the quality of the laboratories do the testing, so we're like an example for labs. And we're a business that actually was part of the NHS for a long time, 25 years until 2021 when we were spun out by MFT, so we're part of MFT.
Hey everyone, I'm Gino, CEO of GeneDrive, which is based up the road in Grafton Street. So you heard from Dwight and Sarah about the detection of the stroke pathway. We're the manufacturers of that device. We also manufacture other point-of-care tests for rapid genetic testing in emergency healthcare centers.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Isan. I work with our point of care as medical director of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Originally, I'm an emergency medicine physician. I made a career shift to the industry a few years ago. Part of the interest here is a couple of new products. Whenever I speak and give examples, you'll find me talking about acetylcholine and traumatic brain injury biomarkers. These are innovations that fit within the theme of Health Innovation Manchester for today, and looking forward to interacting with all of you. Thank you.
So I'm going to start with Matt first, if that's okay. So, you know, since at this intersection, we're using these technologies for clinical research and we're exploring pilots like these in the real world. So, from your perspective, where is digital technology having the greatest impact at this point in time in research or diagnostics pathway project?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's different in different diseases, to be honest. So I think there's always this sort of balance between what's being innovated within clinical care pathways and what the opportunities are in clinical trials. And you've often got an opportunity to try things in clinical trials. So things like we talked about earlier with the remote spirometry, actually using AI-guided echo in heart failure as well was something that we were able to do, which was actually then used live in Scotland and reduced waiting times for echoes from about 2 years down to about 6 weeks. So there are great opportunities. I think the truth, my view of the truth, is that actually using things in a clinical trial can, you've got a sponsor generally who's prepared to pay for it, and you can then test how it works, albeit in a more controlled environment, and then there are issues of scaling into a broad environment. Yeah, I think Sarah raised in her presentation and also in the questions the biggest challenge of actually innovating in clinical care generally isn't the technology, generally isn't the ability to do a high quality test and prove the value. It's actually the funding models are not aligned. And that's the thing that is different in a clinical trial. We can align the funding models. And so it's not quite the question you asked me, but I feel necessary to kind of actually drive the message that there isn't a need for more innovation, there's a need for more scale of innovation. And that really is what we should be focusing on next. So, yeah, I hope I've answered your question.
No, you haven't actually. It dives a little bit into the follow-on question that I had about barriers in terms of do they feel the same for both kind of degrees to scale up?
No, I think, I mean, there are different barriers. I think, we've had conversations today about essentially rule-out tests or tests where you are looking at the probability, probabilistic outcome, and you're prepared to live with a different level of risk. I hate to bring it down to money, but I'm going to. So, a large-scale phase 3 clinical trial can be costing the sponsor between $400 million and $1 billion. You don't go into a trial with a primary endpoint with a novel test unless the regulators are absolutely going to accept it, because and actually, even if the regulators are going to accept it, you're essentially asking the leader in a pharma company to bet their career that you've actually got a technology that works properly. Losing $1 billion clinical trial off the back of getting the right results is pretty career limiting. So there's a different set of barriers and hurdles to get over. It just comes back to what I would always say, which is understand who all the end users are and all of the people who are going to use the information that's being collected, the people that you're collecting the information from, and make sure that you're serving them as well as you possibly can. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's easy to do something in one place than another. It's very situational. You need to go through the methodology of what's the quality that's required, how are you going to achieve that quality, and how are you going to make sure that all of the end users are fully bought into what you're doing.
Absolutely, and just a final question in terms of, we didn't really explore it in the presentation, but we were thinking about interoperability and the architecture that we need to roll out a solution like this that is digitally enabled. So, how important it is to invest on that side of things?
I mean, it's critical, and I think that is the difference between a proof of concept and then being able to do something scale. And it is a meaningful difference between a clinical trial environment and a clinical care environment. In a clinical trial environment, you've got a closed loop in terms of where the data is going. It's going into an electronic data capture system, whichever one's being used. You've got one set of solutions that you need to be able to deliver interoperability with. I thought the conversation about what we do with ambulances was an absolutely fascinating one. There's a lot of different stuff we could do across different conditions that would support point of care testing that I'm pretty sure would make a benefit. But exactly the point that was made is if you try and do that at that scale, you're going to end up with a whole set of signals that you don't really know what to do with. You're going to have a problem with your, getting all the data into the patient record, and then some poor bugger's got to actually interpret it all. So I think we need to be very, very careful that we don't allow ourselves to run off with what could be really cool technologies. We need to think about clinical care pathways first. Solve and figure out what problems are, and then find the technologies that solve those. But make sure that when you're looking at scale, you are putting the right amount of long-term funding into integrations into data systems.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to ask if I can ask some questions to Gino now. So, but following that thread, scaling. But Genedrive is a Manchester-based company. It was born here with significant experience trying to break through, taking new diagnostics technology, solving a new market that really is not there, and is known to that rapidly lot collaboration with academics, with NHS consultants, etc. So, what's been, or what are the toughest challenges that you've gone through when introducing diagnostics like this into the health markets?
Hello, we have here. I think, first of all, to absolutely echo what Matt said, the technology is not the hard part. The implementation at scale, as you've heard from the tutorial before, are absolutely where it's at. I think we've been very lucky in the sense that both of our products and the care pathways that we're trying to change are backed by, very strong clinical guidance. And also the people we work with, especially in Manchester. I mean, you said it was like, it takes a village. I think it takes a metropolis. I mean, there's so many different stakeholders that are involved, and bringing them on line as early as possible, and everyone trying to do, this change of practice, which at the end of the day, it's all about prevention. But I totally echo the point, and you're going to hear it probably every time you ask me a question. It's all about you're saving a lot of money, but that needs to be redistributed to the point of intervention. And I think that is the biggest challenge, especially for a small company like ours. We're 40 people, and it's hard to survive all. That's the glacial pace of the NHS. I think it's not in favour of SME, you see.
So just diving a little bit into that. So it's not really around the regulation. It's not really around clinical confidence into technologies. For small businesses, the reimbursement mechanisms that might not be in place in Europe and in the new markets?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if it's quite sad to say, but if I look back 7 years when we started this, and if you put a business case together to do this, you wouldn't do it. It just doesn't make sense. We spend £500,000 a month, and there's no reimbursement process at the start of that. Again, very different for the type of numbers you were talking about. But, if you're going to be innovative and push things forward, you're kind of hoping that there's a process and a reimbursement at the end, because the clinical case is so strong and the savings are so strong and productivity gains are so obvious. How can it not be good in place? But that's where they're at, as you heard from Dwight and Sarah earlier on. Biggest challenge, absolutely.
Any advice that you could give to an early stage project thinking of launching our diagnostics?
Perseverance is obviously one. I think obviously having strong clinical champions is absolutely key. Again, we've been very lucky with that, and groups of people who don't let perfection get in the way of progress, because you are innovating as you're going along and continuous improvement. But I come back to, we're based in an incubator building just up the road, and we've been in existence for probably 15 years, and we're still waiting to hatch effectively from that incubator building. So I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask for what the success criteria are, but just strong clinical collaborators with a willingness to change clinical pathways. And that's what you're hearing. Here. But it's a political argument now. The political argument is, how do we implement these types of technologies at scale when they have been proven in various models to be cost effective with huge productivity gains? Not doing so accepts that we waste all of that and have worse outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. Great protection. So I'm going to ask Simon now a few questions. So I'm an industry collaborator, so coming from the NHS and playing on this space of quality assurance. And we learned a little bit about in the Dorming project how important it is quality when you're doing any diagnostics. So how can innovation improve quality assurance in diagnostics? Is there any, particularly when testing is more decentralized, are there any things that you can share from your work that you've done on these genomics space?
Slightly worried though, because obviously from that question, because obviously the ambulance service experience was not positive around the quality assurance side of things. But no, I mean, I think the reality is that quality assurance is just part of the framework. And I think, yes, it has a role to play with respect to introduction of new tests, and particularly a decentralized testing model, where the end users of the test itself are not essentially experienced diagnostic scientists or biomedical scientists who discussed doing it right. It only becomes more important. Although, it is challenging at times, and I think practical implementation, things that you can do to make that better, you can't get away from the fact that you're using a test that's being used by a diversity group of users. in a completely different setting to a specialised group. So the point of care test scenario has a lot of challenges with respect to making sure that its devices work properly, are accurate, etc. Don't forget that the manufacturers themselves put a lot of time and effort into the validation of that test. So when it gets out into the real market, what you're really doing is just verifying that it works properly. And that's why you have to do so much to try and just make sure that you keep on top of that. But it's undoubtedly a challenge. I think the actual biggest parts of that challenge, though, are around, if you take away the funding side of it, introductions test, the biggest challenge is around how you implement that with a diverse group of users. From my experience working with GeneDrive and the other partners in the DEVOTE project, here you're actually taking a genetic test, first implementation of a genomic test in a point-of-care environment globally. It's not, the troponin stuff is the existing test that did troponin. People are experienced using that. Nobody's experienced using a point-of-care device, which is a genetic test in the real world. And so actually part of the challenge that GEO has, not just the funding and how you get implemented, is how do you train the end users to understand the specifics and the novelties of genetics, make a difference to how you implement that test in the real world. And that is really quite challenging because you have to get over people's perceptions of how much you need to test and who you need to test, etc. Because it doesn't work like that in genetics. So that's a real part of the challenge of implementation. Comes back to just understanding how the test works and how you might implement it practically.
Well, as genetics takes a more prevalent, or presence in pharmacogenomics and informing precision medicines, do you think there's a balanced risk approach towards the quality testing? So should it be looked differently on visual point-of-care testing?
Yeah, I think that it is different in terms of how you control it. It probably doesn't need as much testing as we talked about in the ambient side of things, but at the same time, the availability of the control materials themselves is a massive challenge because you're taking example of a stroke point-of-care device. You've got 32 different variants of the gene that potentially you've got to be able to pick up and test for. And each one of those has got to be manufactured in a control material that allows the machine, the device, to actually ensure it works properly. So actually making these manufacturing materials, you can't just do it from patient samples because they just don't, A, they don't exist, and B, you've got to get them in a format that you can use in a point-of-care device. So again, complexities around how you make control materials that work for these devices. That requires working with departments like the genome engineering unit at the university, managed to actually genetically engineer samples that can work in the sample. That's what we've been doing to make these control materials because they don't exist. So that's challenging, but it's not insurmountable. It's the experience that we've got from this DEVOTE partnership as we've brought that together to develop sort of first proof of principle type device control materials working in this device, but in other devices as well, potentially in the future.
That's it's impressive to see how genomics is now kind of taking off really by demonstrating how we can use it in probably in the real world setting. Can you please move on to the Sam? Sorry, Sam, you have a very long career. Really good experience, not just in the medical device sector, but in the pharmaceutical sector. You've been in a few pharmaceutical companies, not just in this continent, I guess. So, what from your lens, bringing new technologies, not testing from big medical device company, and if you look at the UK, what are why is the UK doing well when compared to other parts of the world that you go face?
Well, actually, there are lots of good things happening in the UK. First, I would say that there's an increasing focus on healthcare innovation, like we are here at Innovation Manchester, and lots of other things happen on that regard. And that drives the focus and the attention of the general population or the general crowd in the healthcare space to think about what could be the potential of using these. Also, we do have great healthcare leaders in the room. We have Rick, for example, Rick and Jones, Philip Jones. You are among the first globally to look into the implementation of high sensitivity point-of-care troponin at the point-of-care testing. It's been followed in other countries as well. Also, we have many other leaders like Paul Collinson, one of the top 100 scientists in the UK, first to publish on high sensitivity troponin years ago. We have Nick Mills, you have Virginia Nicole, lots of great healthcare leaders here who drive the new approaches and implementation of innovation in healthcare. And that's great. One more thing I can think of is, UK left the European Union. Not necessarily the best thing in many aspects, but on other aspects, this made the UK doesn't have to wait for the European approval of new technologies. So, for example, those tests were cleared in the UK a year or a year and a half ahead of the rest of Europe, which gives a leadership position in driving this innovation and implementation across the world. Right? So these are good things. And there is also the infrastructure of the healthcare system when it comes to meticulously analyzing and putting numbers and looking at guidelines and providing clear guidance on when to use what and how to use it. And so this is kind of enforced, and I see the nice guidelines in the UK, unlike other countries, they are meticulously followed. Some countries, they just don't look at the guidelines, like in Germany, head injury guidelines haven't been updated since 2015. But we do have one for recently published in May 2023 from the NICE head injury committee, and so forth.
So I'm hearing the UK is still a place that is ahead in some things, but are there any risks on falling behind, maybe on the clinical implementation, adoption at scale, compared to other countries that might be slower and about the British rollout?
Well, definitely, there are always areas for improvement, and from my personal perspective, I would say that generally in the UK, I believe we need to maintain the balance between being perfect and being right. Right? When it comes to new healthcare innovation, adoption and implementation, I believe we need a more pragmatic approach rather than meticulous approach, right? Because perfection sometimes kills. For example, there were talks during the day about stroke, right? The traumatic brain injury assay that we have launched as plasma first and then whole blood next is now in the guidelines of the French, Spanish, Scandinavian, American guidelines for head injury. Several committees over there, ASAP, for example, the American College of Emergency Physicians and the American College of Surgeons. In the UK, they do not recommend the traumatic brain injury biomarkers because it lacks the clinical utility and health economic value. Well, humble opinion, they were looking at prognostication, but the current approval is a rule-out test whether the patient has sustained a mild traumatic brain injury or not. That's the difference. Other countries moved forward. They looked at different applications beyond the approved indication, like maybe of interest to you, Sarah and Sam. Christian Ford published a paper, actually 2 papers now. They use the point of care testing with the traumatic brain injury biomarkers, and they can differentiate between ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke at the site of the incident before the patient gets transported. It takes 15 minutes, right? That defines what kind of treatment you could start earlier with that patient. Right? High sensitivity troponin, we heard about the pre-hospital application with the ambulances and so forth. Right? So there are areas who are doing very well, but lacking behind because the approach is more meticulous than being pragmatic. The balance needs to be refined.
So it's a balance between speed and navigating with what Matt said at the beginning, the declining property before we can roll with it. Any further comments from any of you around any of the questions before I open to questions from the audience? No? So any questions from anyone from the audience to our analysts following this conversation? No questions? Everyone wants to go lunch? Okay. Yeah.
Right. We had the NICE conference yesterday, and we talked about the new health technology adoption fund, which is going to put a funding mandate behind medtech, which is never had before. Medicines have had that. I wondered, is that in your experience? How's it work in other countries, and has the lack of a funding mandate been for diagnostics been an issue for adoption?
Do you are you address the question to any particular analysts or?
Well, I think it's
Absolutely. Definitely in other countries where healthcare funding is not offered or clearly defined how to approach it, makes it a hindrance. Because, as Matt mentioned, you get along with the new technology, but then the company needs to decide on how to maintain the business, right? Benefiting patients and everything, but if the product doesn't pick up, it will be killed in manufacturing. So if there is no process for reimbursement, there is no clarity how could this come to a wide scale of use, well, investment tends to go somewhere else in terms of time, effort, and money, right? So, for example, in the UK, we are heavily focused now on high-sensitivity horse, for example, because there is a clear process and objective. With traumatic brain injury, we decided to stop it until the NICE guidelines get to see the outcome of the clinical research, which will cost close to £1 million. Right? So healthcare spending and funding and the process of how to achieve it definitely is important.
Yeah, Rick, I would just add to that. I think it's definitely a welcome development. We have 2 products that have been NICE recommended, but the process that we're bringing in now with putting some limited funding behind NICE recommended products for medtech is for prospective only. So they've completely missed out all of the technologies in the sort of backward horizon scanning to include into their network going forward. So it's definitely welcome, but I think there's still a mop-up job to do with the system stuff that they've already approved, personally.
So I kind of hate to say this because I'm a massive advocate of the NHS. If I'm advising a startup medtech company, I'm advising them to go and work in Scandinavia. I'm advising them to go and work in closed systems in the US. Because if you're in those environments, you can do the experiment. You've got a team who actually want to work with you on the overall health economic outcome. And they've got the ability to shift money around in the system so that you can take the benefits that are being delivered and use those to reimburse the work that you do. It's a ridiculous situation, frankly. It makes me quite angry because we've got the data here, we've got all the skills here. We seem to lack the ability to put the business models together. And it's been mentioned earlier, but if the shift left is going to succeed, we're going to have to change the business model. It's as simple as that. So I'm also optimistic that we can make those things happen with the right will. Maybe I'm being foolish. But at the moment, as I say, if I have I probably need 3 or 4 device companies a week, and I'm generally having a conversation with them where they start thinking that the NHS is the place to be. And I ask them, well, show me a company that's actually been able to scale an innovation in the NHS and get to a point where they're sustainable. And it's kind of hard to point to one, honestly. So we need to think really hard about that as a group. And I would challenge and encourage Health Innovation Manchester to do what you can do as an organisation to drive that level of kind of total business model innovation, rather than looking for what's the next set of devices or the next set of, innovation problems to solve. Actually scale the things that we've got now.
Yeah. And that's a great way to finish the conversation. I've heard it's important that we listen to your perspective, sorry, to given the perspective from industry, what you're telling us, and we are doing this together, right? We can't do it with each other. And I do recognize that, yes, there's loads of work to do, but then there's the ability that maybe at Limestone can do things slightly different, because, looking at the growth trajectory for the last 10 years is one of the fastest growing regions in the UK. It's been Lotus model for the parts of England. So we kind of now know what the problems are, so we need to try to solve them. Thank you for your comments. Okay.